So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us online today. I'm grateful to see so many members of LULAC, of the LULAC family, civic leaders, and partners with us today. This gathering comes at a meaningful moment. We are in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month, a time when we honor the contributions Latinos have made to this country. And this week, we also celebrate the independence anniversaries of Mexico and several other Central American nations, moments that remind us of our shared history and the enduring quest for freedom that unites our people across many continents. For 97 years, LULAC has carried that same quest forward in the United States,
Los
working to
Estados
ensure
Unidos.
Latinos are treated as fully Americans under the law. What we discuss today goes to the heart of that struggle: equal protection under the law and who gets treated as a full and equal American. For me, this fight is also deeply personal. As a Marine who served during the Vietnam War, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution. I carried that commitment on the battlefield, and I carry it with me still. That's an oath that did not end when I took off the uniform. It lives with me in all my work with LULAC and in our mission to protect the rights and dignity of all Latinos. I fought for a country that promised liberty and justice for all. My service then and now is about holding America to that promise. On September the 8th, the Supreme Court issued a decision that should concern every one of us. In a brief order, the court lifted a temporary block that had prevented federal agents in Los Angeles from stopping people based solely on their race, language, location, or type of work. In plain terms, it opened the door to racial profiling. Once again, think about that. The highest court in the land, okay, for now has allowed agents to question someone simply because of how they look or how they sound. This is not new. History gives us painful reminders. Jim Crow policing, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, the Zoot Suit riots, and more recently, stop and frisk in New York. Time and again, communities of color have been treated as suspects first, and then citizens as second. And each time it has taken people like us, our groups, organizing, litigating, and leading to pull America back to its constitutional promises. What does this decision mean for us today? It means millions of Latinos and immigrants, citizens and non-citizens alike, now face a greater risk of being stopped, questioned, or harassed simply because of who we are. This is not just bad policy, it's unconstitutional. The Fourth Amendment demands individualized suspicion. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law. When appearance or accent becomes a shortcut for suspicion, those guarantees are weakened for everyone. But let me be clear, this is not the final word. It is a setback, yes, but a temporary one in an ongoing legal fight. And it puts the responsibility on all of us, advocates, lawmakers, and community members, to demand protections, set
Solicitar
guardrails,
protecciones,
and ensure our
fijar
freedoms
límites y
are
asegurar
not
nuestros.
eroded. LULAC has faced challenges like this before, and for nearly a century, we have risen to meet them. Our founders came together in 1929 in Corpus Christi to reject the idea that Latinos were somehow less American. Every generation since then has carried this fight forward, and today that responsibility is ours. Because constitutional rights do not enforce themselves, people do. And that is why your presence here matters today. Together, we are the guardians of our own freedom. I want to thank you again for being here and for standing with us in this fight. It is an honor to serve alongside all of you. And with that, now I will pass the baton to our CEO, Juan Peruano, who will introduce our distinguished guests, our good friends, and our partners. Take it away, Juan.
Thank you very much, Roman. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juan Peruano, and I'm the CEO of LULAC. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit different. And I want to ask for your patience as we work through a couple technical things. I want to let everyone know that we do have an ASL interpreter that's joined us, as well as an interpreter that will interpret everything from English to Spanish. There should be an option also to enable captions in the menu button at the bottom of the tools for Zoom. Now, today's conversation is going to be in two parts. First, we have some distinguished guests, legal experts, advocates, community leaders that are going to be joining us in conversation today. We face some of the most challenging times that Latinos and immigrants have faced in this country for over 100 years. LULAC has been fighting this fight for 97 years, and we are committed to continuing this work through every means available to us. And a big part of that includes our litigation efforts, our advocacy efforts, and our grassroots mobilization efforts as well. So the second part of our convening will be where we want to hear from you. Today really is about all of the attendees that are participating. We will have a breakout session at the end of our speakers forum, where we will have moderated facilitators to get your input and your guidance relative to the work at the community level and at a grassroots level. So we hope that you will join us after the speakers in these breakout rooms to give us your thoughts and your ideas in regards to the work that needs to happen on the ground. Now, it's my distinguished pleasure to introduce a couple of speakers that we have that are joining us today. First is Attorney General Aaron Ford. Aaron Ford is Nevada's top law enforcement official and the first African-American to hold statewide office in Nevada. A former state Senate Majority Leader, Attorney General Ford has championed criminal justice reform and civil rights. As Attorney General, he has led multi-state efforts to defend DACA and oppose the detention of migrant children, and he has pushed for pattern and practice investigations to root out systemic police misconduct in his state. His unique perspective as Attorney General informs his commitment to fair and constitutional policing. Now, his flight has been a little bit delayed, so he should be joining us a little bit after 3:30, but we will welcome him as soon as he joins. In addition, we have Angelica Salas, the Executive Director of CHIDLA, the Coalition for Human Immigrant Rights, a renowned immigrant rights leader, widely regarded as one of our nation's most gifted organizers. Since 1999, Angelica has built CHIDLA into a powerhouse for immigrant advocacy, spearheading campaigns that won in-state tuition and driver's licenses for undocumented individuals in California. She herself is an immigrant from Durango, Mexico, brought to the United States at the age of 5 and reunited with her parents. Her personal journey and decades of community work give her firsthand insights into the human impact of immigration policy and enforcement. We're also joined by Jin-Hee Lee, Director of Strategic Initiatives, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a civil rights attorney leading multifaceted advocacy at LDF to secure full equality for African Americans. Ms. Lee has over 15 years of litigation experience fighting racial bias. She supervised LDF's Justice and Public Policy, Public Safety Project to address entrenched biases in law enforcement. And she was the lead counsel in the landmark case challenging the NYPD's discriminatory trespass stops and Black and Latin trespass stops of Black and Latinx public housing residents. She brings deep experience in constitutional law and strategic litigation to combat systemic racism. Jin-Hee, thank you for joining us today. Maya Wiley, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a nationally respected civil rights attorney and activist who leads a coalition of more than 200 organizations fighting for the rights of all Americans. Maya has a rich background in both government and advocacy. She was the first Black woman to serve as counsel to New York City mayor, where she advanced civil and immigrant rights and later chaired New York City's Civil Complaint Review Board, overseeing police accountability, including the case that led to the firing of the officer who killed Eric Gardner. With her breadth of experience, she excels in building broad coalitions and driving policy to protect civil rights. And finally, Ambassador Norm Eisen, co-founder and executive chair of Democracy Defenders Fund, a diplomat, attorney, and author renowned as a good government giant in defense of the rule of law. Ambassador Eisen served as President Obama's ethics czar and then as the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic, leading anti-corruption and human rights initiatives. He later was special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee for the Trump investigation, impeachment, and as founder of Democracy Defenders, he has brought over 125 legal matters in the last 7 months and has won landmark court battles against authoritarian policies. He offers a democracy and governance lens, examining how policies like racial profiling undermine democratic values and how legal and civic action can restore those values. Thank you, all of you, for making the time today and joining us in this conversation. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. Angelica, please let me start with you. You came to the United States as a child and you were reunited with your parents. For over 2 decades, you've been helping immigrant families find a voice. With this ruling essentially giving ICE a green light to target anyone who looks or sounds immigrant, what are you hearing on the ground? Can you share an example of what is happening in Los Angeles and specifically about the fear and the human impact these decisions are already creating for immigrant families?
Well, yes, and thank you so much for having me here. I have such deep respect for LULAC. Thank you for your incredible fight in defense of our community. So as you stated, I am an immigrant from Mexico. I'm a Mexican immigrant from Durango, Mexico. I came here as a child to live with my undocumented parents who were already here, lived through the deportation of my mother, was able to be reunited with my family, and then was able to, many years later, legalize my status and finally become a US citizen. And so I know what it means to live in fear, but I also know what it means to live in liberty and with the sense that you can be protected through a simple a document. Life changes for you. And so that's why I fight. I want everybody in this country to live with freedom. I wanted to share a story of one of our members who has actually gone through this experience, because I think nobody can tell the story of what's happening than the people directly impacted. So bear with me as I share that story with you.
Ella el día lunes tuvo una cita con migración y por respetar las reglas, al salir la detuvieron. Después de Santa Ana la trajeron en uno de estos edificios que está por acá. Lleva 4 días encerrada, durmiendo en el sótano. Están viviendo peor que los animales. Nosotros vemos los videos, cómo arrancan a los bebés de las mamás, cómo bajan a los señores jardineros, los señores que trabajan en la construcción, los que están trabajando en cualquier tienda. Los tratan como animales. No merecemos eso. Deberíamos tener derechos. Como inmigrante, nosotros estamos acá, venimos a trabajar. Queremos un sueño americano. Amamos este país.
So it's so important that we hear the stories and what's happening to our community and how we see treatment in this moment. So I want to just briefly give you an update as to what's going on in Los Angeles. To me, this is a defining moment for the civil and constitutional rights of Latinos in the US. Together, we have to join our political, economic, and social power to stop the injustice in our communities. There are close to 14 million people who are living in this country undocumented. 28 million are naturalized citizens like myself. And also, we have green card holders that number approximately 13 million. 2.1 million are temporary holders. So close to 53 million people who live in this country are foreign born and who are targets of immigration enforcement in this moment. The majority of the people are Latino, but as Latinos, we speak not only for ourselves, but for all communities, be they Black, Asian, or from any continent in terms of supporting their rights in this moment as well. We also have to understand that undocumented immigrants are majority also Latino. 74% are Latino. However, as I describe this fight and what we're confronting, we have to understand that U.S. citizens in this country are being attacked simply for being brown, speaking Spanish, speaking English with an accent, working in low-wage industries, or just simply being at the wrong place at the wrong time. There's an all-out assault here in California, and specifically in the Los Angeles region with its people. In our region, there's about 18 million people. LA County alone has a population of about 10 million people, and about of that 5 million people are Latino. 4 million people in LA, the whole region are actually immigrants. Why do I say all these numbers? Because I need you to understand just the scale of who is in this dragnet, who is targeted in this moment. So since June 6th, we have seen an all-out military and federal immigration enforcement attack on our communities with an intentional focus on Black and brown neighborhoods, especially those led by Latinos and by Black mayors. CHIRLA convenes the Los Angeles Region Rapid Response Network and includes over 80 organizations, over 1,600 volunteers, and a hotline for the entire region. And it is here how we have seen the scale of attack on our communities. We've already had over 2,000 sightings of immigration in our community, immigration enforcement in our community, 734 enforcement actions witnessed by responders, and 8 enforcement actions happening daily on weekends and on holidays. This is like the average amount. About over 50 people are being detained on a daily basis. It has not stopped. We only had a brief respite during the period of July 11th through July 30th during the first TRO that we got in the federal court. But after that, it's been pretty profound and I would say also very aggressive in the way that would be our communities being detained. The numbers are right now about 5,000 people who are detained in our region. And these are folks who are being detained by camouflage wearing agents, carrying armaments of war. They don't identify themselves. They shield their identity when asked. And then what we have witnessed is rampant racial profiling, but also excessive use of force. They are beating us. They are hurting us. So we have documented incidents of people being beaten and maimed. Individuals have landed in hospitals with broken legs, arms, their physical injuries. That is why in Los Angeles, we rose up, we fought back in the courts, and we've also fought back in the streets. We've sued the government alongside ACLU, Public Counsel, Endelon, Immigrant Defenders, the United Farm Workers, the Los Angeles Worker Center Network, and continue to fight for a temporary restraining order. And you already heard about the news. The Supreme Court basically said that our restraining order was going to be lifted, that the people who are harming us, the people who are hurting us, can continue to do so even as we fight our case in court. But we're not giving up. On September 24th, we continue to seek a permanent injunction and continue to press forward our claims of Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, and lack of access to due process. We have worked with our local mayors, our governor, and with our state legislature, and we've been able to pass legislation that now sits on the governor's desk in order to further protect our children in schools, expand protections in healthcare clinics, where they've wanted to go in or detain our people. We're demanding accountability of law enforcement officers, especially these federal agents who do not identify themselves. And then finally, and I'll conclude with this, we're continue to mobilize in the streets. We're asking everyone to raise your voices on October 1st, the first day of the new fiscal year, and speak up against the $170 billion dedicated to hunting us down, snatching our people, detaining them, and separating from their families, and taking this money from all that we need, which is our healthcare clinics, our safety net programs, our schools. That's what we need our money for, not for this. So speak up on October 1st. Here in Los Angeles, we'll be mobilizing on October 4th in LA. Make September and October of 2025 Hispanic Heritage Month. And as a time when we celebrate our heritage. Of course, we are proud of who we are, but what we also want to do in these days, in these months, is fight back in the courts and in the streets for our rightful place in this country. Please demand that all elected officials, especially Latinos, that they are ferocious in their defense of our community and against the federal government's attack on our community. Everybody has to take action, and I want us to feel together the power that we have in order to ensure that our community can live free in this country. As Latinos, we are united by family, by community, and by our solidarity with others. Let's use our power in order to defend ourselves in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Roman and I were actually on the ground in Los Angeles early on after the raids. It was incredible to see the media narrative, which quite frankly was counter to what we saw on the ground, but really so inspired by Angelica, your incredible work. So thank you so much for your leadership during these really, really trying times. Ms. Lee, from a legal perspective, how alarming is the Supreme Court move? Now, you've spent years challenging biased policing. For example, you led that landmark case in the New York stop-and-frisk practices in public housing that targeted Black and Latino New Yorkers. In your view, what fundamental constitutional rights are at stake here? Does this signal a rollback of protections like the Fourth Amendment or equal protection? And what does history teach us from Jim Crow to stop-and-frisk about the dangers of courts sanctioning racial profiling?
Well, first of all, thank you, LULAC, for having me and your leadership in this important and terrifying moment. This is a time when all civil rights organizations must stand together, and I know that we at the Legal Defense Fund are very proud to be a partner with you in this fight among the other organizations represented here. I myself am an immigrant, and I think to all of the people that we had just talked about who come from families who have sacrificed so much for a better future. And so in many ways what is at stake here is very just foundational to what this country is supposed to be, because the reason why so many want to start a new life in the United States is because of the principles and the values that this country is supposed to espouse. Has it ever fully realized those principles? No. But the fact that that we as a country have embraced them as the ideals that we should be working towards, and really that is what is at stake right now in terms of any sanctioning of or any kind of endorsement of racial profiling. You mentioned that, yes, I was part, and we continue to be a part of the litigation. There were 3 stop-and-frisk litigations in New York City that really dealt with a problem of racial profiling that has been condemned across the country. I think everyone has looked to the experience in New York City as precisely what governments should not be doing, and that is criminalizing people and engaging in law enforcement actions because of a person's race. And that is one of the most egregious forms of government action, to take that level of enforcement against a person because of who they are and because of who they look like. And that raises some of the most fundamental rights that we have in our Constitution. A lot of the decision that was issued focuses on the Fourth Amendment, which is deals with when is an officer or someone from the government able to invade in your kind of your privacy, to engage in a stop and ask you questions and so forth. What has not been a major part of the decision, but which is absolutely a major red flag, is our 14th Amendment rights, the Equal Protection Clause, that people should not be treated differently because of their race. And the thinking behind at least the concurrence that Justice Kavanaugh had written in support of lifting the temporary restraining order that was going to stop this racial profiling in the Los Angeles, area is deeply, deeply troubling. Because one of the lessons that we learned in New York City is that the excuse the police department, the NYPD gave about their racial profiling practices is that Black and brown New Yorkers were overrepresented in data, in terms of people who had been engaged or arrested, for potential crimes. But that is not any, and that doesn't have any reflection as to whether an individual person of a particular race has engaged in a crime. And it also doesn't reflect the inherent racism and discrimination within our criminal legal system that perhaps have caused that overrepresentation of certain races, within that data. And so when a police officer approaches someone, the idea that that person's race should be a factor of criminality is so you kind of think about that. Essentially what you're saying is that people of certain races are more likely to be criminals, and that of course is very much a connection to one of the most pernicious racial stereotypes that we have in this country, which is associating, criminality or violence with race. And that is a stereotype that we should all condemn unequivocally and try to fight against. And frankly, that is what's missing in this opinion from Justice Kavanaugh, because, for example, the idea that a person's race would be in any way indicative of their immigration status, because we all know that there are immigrants from all countries, with all nationalities, all races who are here. The idea that because a person's accent or a person's employment is indicative of any kind of criminality or document or immigration status that has nothing to do with that, right? They are just making stereotypes. They're relying on data that is that continues to reinforce stereotypes, but also does not recognize the reasons of that overrepresentation. For example, that people of particular races have less access to various forms of employment. So perhaps they're more likely to be engaged in the type of employment that doesn't provide health insurance and the kind of financial stability that that everyone wants. That has nothing to do with the criminal legal system. It doesn't have to do anything to do with the immigration system. And to prey on the most disadvantaged and to subject them to the fear and the likelihood of being victims of law enforcement action, regardless of of whether they are immigrants or not, that is a scary prospect. And so this is something that we should all be very concerned about. I think it's something that we as lawyers, for myself, I was quite alarmed. But I also don't want to overreact, right? Because this is a summary order. That's one of, there's been a lot of criticisms from the Supreme Court to issue orders like this that have a tremendous impact on our country without really explaining, the reasoning behind it. We have the opinions of, of one justice explaining why this decision was made. We don't know what the thinking of the other justices are. The temporary restraining order should not have been lifted because what the district court had done is to put a stop at this tremendous harm that is happening on a continual basis. I think that we all agree that that was a wrong decision, but I don't want to put any more importance on this order than it is. And I think that's why it's very important for legal advocates and civil rights scholars and people on the ground to be really working together to make sure that there is not another decision like this, or perhaps that we can push for another ruling that could minimize the damage that this opinion has made. But again, this is just another example of what we are seeing, across the country and also from our current administration. And that is, this notion that we live in a colorblind society that, sees no racial inequality. And the consequences of that has been tremendous. The attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, the notion that advancing racial equality is itself a form of discrimination, that is very much a part of this, right? Because you have to buy into the false narrative that there is no racial inequality in the present day to be able to reach conclusions like this. And to be able to engage in the kind of magical thinking where where it's absolutely permissible for an officer to be kind of using race as a factor in in their law enforcement activities. And again, this is something that just is so dangerous, and and it's just one, it's really important to hear from people on the ground, because people are being harmed on a daily basis.
Jinhee, I lived in New York for 17 years and I was racially profiled. I will tell you that it stays with you. It never leaves you. I was on Broadway, 92nd Street. I was outside a movie theater. I was waiting for my partner to join me. She was 10 minutes late. And in that time, two police officers came around the corner. They stopped, asked me to put my hands against the wall. They frisked me. And when I turned around and asked why, they said, "We're looking for Latino with black hair." That was literally the only criteria for them to basically stop and effectively do whatever they wanted for that period of time. It scared me really to my core. And if it can happen to me, it really can happen to absolutely anyone. And we always have to be on the offensive here. So thank you so much for all the incredible work you do. I wanted to go to Maya next. Maya, you've been a leader both inside government and in civil society on civil rights. When you see the Supreme Court effectively give the green light to what Justice Sotomayor called flagrantly unlawful conduct by law enforcement, what does that mean for the progress we've made on civil rights? Drawing on your experience leading New York's Police Oversight Board, do you see parallels between this moment and past struggles? And why do you believe that this is a crucial turning point in our fight against systemic racism and for a truly inclusive democracy?
Well, thank you, Juan. Thank you, Roman. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and with Angelica and Jinhee and Norm. I think this is just an example of, I'm just going to start with the PowerPoint, not PowerPoint, but PowerPoint, which is, this is an incredible coalitional effort to just say, I dissent, which is what Justice Sonia Sotomayor said effectively and clearly and publicly. Look, it doesn't matter what vantage point you take. Jinhee gave great examples of New York City, where I was fortunate both to be a counsel to the New York City mayor that said he was going to end the racial profiling that was stop and frisk policies, and brought them down substantially, but still needed an independent monitor for that court order because racial profiling was still a very hard nut to crack, because law enforcement basically could make up an excuse for why it had stopped or detained someone. Sometimes, and there's data to this, sometimes law enforcement officers, not all, don't tell the truth because they think the ends justify the means, and they think they know who's guilty, and their own biases or racism can factor in even if they don't think it does. That is something that has required both attention from folks who are inside government and outside of policing, as well as inside, as well as civilian oversight. And I was also privileged to chair the New York City Civilian Oversight Oversight Authority, where we had civilian oversight and civilian prosecutorial powers. But guess what we didn't have? The ability to have oversight over racial profiling. That was not in our power as an independent authority. Why do I say that? Because let me just tell you how far we had come despite the fact that we still hadn't arrived where we needed to be before this decision. Before this decision, the U.S. Supreme Court had still given kind of a big open kind of loophole by saying, well, you know, if you're pulling over a driver, you know, this was an opinion from about 20 years ago, you know, there could be lots of reasons that race might not have a part of it, but it was kind of created this sense. Some of the greatest areas in which we had stops, unlawful stops that were racial profiling, was in traffic. And as we know, as we just saw with the devastating death that we saw in Chicago just recently, what was it? It was traffic related. When we heard that ICE, you know, which had a lot of complaints about excessive force, for example, even before Donald Trump's administration and the mass deportations that Angelica and that LULAC has been fighting, and Shirla has been fighting, and LDF has been fighting. But here's the thing. We know from journalists that a lot of those shootings come at traffic stops. So we know that when loopholes are created, we see greater both excessive force and it is racial profiling with excessive force, right? The two often go hand in hand. So what have we left? But we did have at least a fundamental principle that gave us the ability inside of government and outside of government to say it was wrong, to say that it was racist, to say that it was dangerous, to say that it undermined public safety. And what we have seen now in the Supreme Court decision is that the highest court in the land, a captured court, a court that has been rolling back fundamental rights, including with the Roe v. Wade, but even before that with voting rights, you know, it's already starting to unweave the tapestry of protection we had created by fighting for rights that said, you can't come at us because of how we appear to you. That is not reasonable. That's just racist. And and even when it was hard to prove it, we had the opportunity to prove it. There was at least the ability to amass the case law. And that's why New York City had the steps and had reduced it, not ended it, but reduced it. And it's back because after George Floyd, and remember, the fight was starting before that. After George Floyd, what we as a civil rights community fought for was the Justice in Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And one of the things that we were that was going to be in that piece of legislation was making it clear that federal, state, and local law enforcement could not racially profile. Now, not only did we not pass that law, and sadly along partisan lines, something that should have been bipartisan, because racial profiling doesn't ask you what your political party is. Just ask what your race is. What we lost was the opportunity to enshrine that. What the Supreme Court has said, and we will not protect you either. In fact, we will say it is reasonable to stereotype. He already said this, but that is devastating. Now, what that does not do, and what we cannot allow, is for any state or local government to think that it's okay. Because that doesn't mean we have state constitutions. And we have local abilities to pass laws. And so it is critically important that rather than accepting this as our reality, we dissent. And we also dissent in a way that says, not only are we adding value, are our communities adding value, does this nation, whether it's our social fabric, our cultural heritage, or our economy, we are necessary parts of a prosperous United States. But here's the other thing we have to say. This isn't about crime. This isn't about safety. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This is about making us less safe, all of us, because there's nothing safe about my friend's son rushing to find his passport because he knew that with his Black skin, he was going to get pulled over. Because he knew it and he was right. And all of us said, yes, go look for it. What do you mean you can't find it? Quickly go get an emergency passport. What that says is we no longer have rights. Any of us, because once they can do it to any of us, they can do it to all of us. And that's the other thing. We are the miner's canary, and we need to make sure everyone understands that if you want to be safe from abuse of government authority, then we all have to be safe or you won't be. So the consequences, while they are horrible, should not deter us from demanding those protections from our state and local governments. This is something that many of the groups here already work on, nor should we stop, and Norm will probably talk about this more as He and LDF and others will, but nor can we stop contesting it in the courts. Because I think the way we get precedents overturned, and this is a bad one, is by continuing to bring the cases that demonstrate the gross injustices. So all our tools and all our levers, all our demands and all our talents and all our people are required for this fight. And so I'm just grateful to be in it with you all, as is the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We will not turn away, we will not shy away, and we will partner with all of you.
Maya, thank you so much. I've come to know Maya really now over the last 2 years. She is my sister from another mother, our go-to in this fight. And thank you for your leadership, Maya, in this and in all things civil rights. I see that Attorney General Aaron Ford has joined us. We're going to go to a question for Norm, and then we're going to go to the Attorney General. Ambassador Eisen, you've been described as a good government giant for your work on the rule of law and democracy. From that broad vantage point, how do you see the Supreme Court decision affecting American democracy? Does allowing what appears to be state-sanctioned racial profiling effectively turn certain Americans into suspects by default, undermining public trust in our institutions? Now, you fought corruption and abuse of power at the highest levels. Do you view this as part of a wider threat of democratic backsliding when our courts permit unequal treatment of citizens?
Juan, thank you for that question. I want to thank you and Roman and all my wonderful colleagues on the screen for the work that you do. I'm so proud to be a part of the LULAC family and to work on these issues with and for LULAC as a council. And I like to think working together with LULAC for all Americans. I want to begin answering that question, and I'm going to keep it tight because we have my dear friend AG Aaron Ford, who has joined us fresh off the airplane. I'm going to keep it tight so we can get to his perspectives, but I want to begin answering your question from a democracy perspective, including those 125 cases and legal matters that we're doing at the Democracy Defenders Fund, with the final words of the powerful dissent by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. The Fourth Amendment, our Constitution, our precious founding document, our holy document, the Fourth Amendment, quote, protects every individual's constitutional right to be free from arbitrary interference by law officers. After today, the decision in the Supreme Court case, that may no longer be true for those who happen to look a certain way, speak a certain way, and appear to work a certain type of legitimate job that pays very little. Because this is unconscionably irreconcilable with our nation's constitutional guarantees, I dissent, wrote Justice Sotomayor. That is so important because the idea that we are able to do sweeps of people in my hometown, as it happens, Los Angeles, that you are able to do sweeps of people on the four criteria in this case: what language they speak, what location they happen to be in, what job they do, and what they look like, is inimical to the American idea. And if those extremely capacious categories are allowed to be the basis for federal law enforcement sweeping people off the street, Juan, as you described yourself being profiled, it's not only a question of those who are being profiled and the terror, the reign of terror this has wrought in Los Angeles. Any one of us can be swept up that way. This is not just a battle to defend our Latino brothers and sisters. This is a fight to protect the United States and everyone in it from becoming a police state, to protect our Constitution, as Justice Sotomayor and the other two justices who dissented with her articulated. And it's a fight to protect our democracy. When you see these kinds of abuses, and this is a piece, Juan and friends, of a much larger pattern of illegality over 200 times that the federal courts have stopped the Trump administration because of various legal violations. It represents an overall attitude of danger and threat for Latinos, for anyone non-Latino. Any of us could fall into those four categories to be swept up by the police. Read that opinion, friends, that dissenting opinion, that American citizens with documentation who are being detained and their documentation confiscated. That is not America. And this fight is a fight for these constitutional rights and for all constitutional rights. And I'm going to end here. In one of those cases that we're so privileged to do at Democracy Defenders Fund as the principal outside counsel for Juan and Roman and LULAC and all of the councils and all of the LULAC friends around the country who are on this Zoom and everybody else. In one of those cases, the birthright citizenship case, where we worked together to file the very first case, that case also went to the United States Supreme Court. We did not quit when the United States Supreme Court ruled against us, and Attorney General Ford will talk about this. The AGs have a parallel case. They said, oh, in the CASA case, so, oh, you have to have a class action. This case is not good enough. Well, guess what? I think we may be with many people on the Zoom and on the screen, co-counsel in this case. Guess what? We together as a coalition filed the new class action 2 hours later. 10 days later, the class was certified and we had a new preliminary injunction. So we are not going to allow anyone to stop us from fighting for the rights of every American, from fighting for the Constitution, peacefully, lawfully, but vigorously fighting for the democracy itself. And we're going to keep on going because this is wrong. Thanks, Juan.
Norm, thank you for all your incredible work. I see that LULAC award right behind you.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us in Long Beach. Thank you for all your incredible work in the litigation front.
It's always there. I didn't put it there just for this Zoot. It lives
I
there.
love it. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now it's my pleasure to really welcome Attorney General Aaron Ford. Attorney General, we gave you an incredible introduction to our audience and attendees. We have over 200 folks still with us today. I want to go to you next. So, General Ford, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Nevada, how do you view the Supreme Court's decision to lift the ban on these profiling-based stops? You've been a vocal proponent of holding police accountable, even pushing for pattern and practice investigations to address systemic abuses. How would this ruling impact trust between law enforcement and community of colors? And what steps can state leaders take to protect residents' rights when the federal courts roll back these protections?
Well, first off, thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Fantastic. I'm at the airport. Apologies. I just literally landed 30 minutes late and didn't want to miss this. And so thank you so much for having me on. And, I've seen Norm get hyped before on important issues, but frankly, not as hyped as he just got on this one. And it's because this is such an important concern for us. And I want to begin by thanking LULAC. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Roman, for convening this conversation. Maya, great to see you as well. I'm going to start just with a comment that I heard the president of HRC say recently at a conference in Vegas. It was so profound to me that I pulled out my phone and I put it in a quote and I signed it with her name and I sent it to my team. And I said, this is powerful. And what she said was, cowardice is contagious. And I have augmented that statement to say, but so is courage. And it takes courage oftentimes for us to stand up, for one person to stand up and to speak out against some of these nonsense, some of the ills that we're seeing. And so LULAC, thank you for not being cowards and instead leading with courage to bring us together to convene on this very important topic. Because in my estimation, with little to no explanation, in fact, SCOTUS has hand waved away the protections of our Constitution to allow government to seize people for no other reason than their ethnicity, or the language that they speak, or the job that they have, right? I mean, these are rejections, as you've heard Norm say, and I'm sure others have said as well, of rights guaranteed to every person here. And as I've said, if the government is allowed to seize Americans based on how they look, then none of our freedoms are safe. This decision, in my mind, is going to undoubtedly strain relationships between minority communities, especially Latino communities, and law enforcement agencies. If law enforcement agencies are allowed to seize and to detain individuals just because they are Hispanic or Latino or speak Spanish, why would those people seek out law enforcement for any matter, right? And as a top law enforcement officer in the state, that's a paramount import to me. It's not only a fundamentally un-American and prejudiced decision, it's a short-sighted one in my estimation. If entire communities don't feel safe around our law enforcement agencies, then that's going to hinder the ability of our agencies to do their job, but even frankly, more importantly than that, hinder the ability of folks who need law enforcement to get the type of support that they need as well. The young woman who's a victim of domestic violence, right? The single father who's a victim of a wage theft issue in his job, or the family who's a victim of a break-in. These problems, they're not just restricted to one group of Americans, to be sure, but when one group of Americans or one group of individuals is unfairly singled out, these problems will not be brought to the attention of our law enforcement agencies. I'm often known to frame community relationships with law enforcement and the government as falling into one of three categories. The first one we all know about, you see it on Law and Order, SVU. It's the one where Olivia Benson is in a witness stand and she's testifying and everybody's nodding their heads saying that what she's saying is true and accurate and everybody else is lying, right? There's a community that believes everything the government says. A lot of trust in the community, right, in the government, in law enforcement. There's a community that had a high level of trust, but for some reason that trust has diminished. Maybe they experienced something through law enforcement themselves or have seen vicariously something that's happened in law enforcement. They have a certain amount of trust, but it's diminished. Then you have some communities like mine, frankly, where I came from, where there was little to no trust in law enforcement, right? And it was because of, again, things that had happened. We wanted them to be there when bad things happened, but sometimes bad things happened when they got there. And so it's in my job, in my current capacity, to augment trust where it already exists. It's to restore it where it's been diminished, or to create it where it's never existed before. And I can tell you right now, this decision does none of those three. In fact, it sets us back. And it's reminiscent of I'm going to be quiet after this, and it's not really a good analogy, but I remember when I was in law school and there was a case that came out, I think it was called Wardlaw versus State. It was an Illinois case. And the question was, Norm, you might remember this better than I, is flight in a high crime area enough for reasonable suspicion to stop someone? If you're running in a neighborhood that is high crime, is that enough to stop somebody? And I was thinking to myself, I sure hope that's not enough to stop somebody, because where I came from, it was you'd be stopping everybody, right? And I just could not believe I had to argue the moot court, Norm, on the other side, and I was arguing that no way the Supreme Court's going to say that you can just stop somebody for running in a high crime area, and I was wrong, to my dismay. And here we are, years later, we have another decision. Again, it's not a perfect analogy, but these notions of looking for ways to now, in this estimation, racially profile individuals, it's gone too far, and it's a problem. One that, again, I commend LULAC for speaking up on, not being cowardice, but not showing cowardice, but showing courage. And I encourage my other attorneys general, frankly, on the other side of the aisle, to show up. They've not. Several of my colleagues and I will continue to speak up against these types of things, and I will stand as an ally in this fight and push back against these, what I consider to be wrong-headed decisions. So again, thanks for having me on, Juan. Sorry for being late, but I'm glad I was able to make it nonetheless.
No, thank you, Aaron. Always really wonderful to have you join us in these conversations. We're going to do a really quick round, 1 minute final thoughts on Angelica. What message do you have for our attendees and the community in regards to how they can get involved on these specific issues and in this fight?
I feel it's important. We're talking about going to the courts, but we also have the court of public opinion. So we need to be public in our disdain for what has just happened. That means that we use every platform we have. We have every Hispanic Heritage celebration that we're going to speak up against this. We mobilize and activate. I gave you 2 dates, October 1st, just as the first day of the fiscal year for the government. Think about what you can do or say, press statements. This is about speaking up constantly in order for us to demonstrate that we're unified as communities of color against racial profiling and discrimination in this country. Our forefathers and foremothers have worked too hard to get us where we are today, and it is our turn to ensure the next generation, the present and next generation, have the defense that they need and the rights they deserve.
Thank you, Angelica. Jinhee, what's the next step from a legal perspective?
Well, even though, I am a litigator by trade, I am well aware that litigation is never the full solution. And so this is a moment where we have to utilize all of the advocacy tools at our disposal. That obviously includes policy and organizing, communications, the public media, public education, and so forth. And, I think this is a very pivotal moment in our history in terms of what kind of country the United States will be. This is, what we have seen for the past year, but, also for the past several years, is an effort for the very privileged few who have been in power in this country and have had the benefits of all of our country's resources and opportunities. It's a desperate attempt to hold on to that power. And at the same time, where our country is becoming increasingly diverse with a wealth of resources and potential and so much that can benefit not only the people within the United States, but of course, throughout the world. And so, this is a moment for everyone to come together and for us to, kind of pull our resources and our strategies. As a litigator, I would, again, not give up on the courts, because sometimes the courts are an important part of this. It is, an important institution within our democracy, but also recognizing that the courts are not and should not be disconnected from the people. And I think that unfortunately, is what has been happening for far too long.
Thank you, Jinhee. Maya, you carry so much on your shoulders in the civil rights community. At times, I know it can seem daunting, given the challenges that we currently face, but what words of encouragement and inspiration do you have for everyone here today and that wants to continue this fight?
Well, first of all, I will start that, my brother Juan, by saying I don't feel we carrying a weight. I feel grateful for all the hands I get to hold. So I just want to say that with deep gratitude and appreciation in holding LULAC's hand, LDF's hand, Chirla's hand. Attorney General Aaron Ford has stepped up so many times, and it's been so gratifying working with the Attorney General. But let me just say this. We come, all of us, from people who have had to struggle, for people who have been profiled generation across generation, for people who fought for the gains they have to lie, cheat, and steal to take from us. And that is what they are doing. The forces that are suggesting there is no racism, or that being racist is a way to counter racism, or that the fear they want us to feel, including a fear of violence, simply for saying racism is real, saying that racial profiling is wrong, saying that all of our people add value, is something that all our forebears have confronted and created more opportunity for us. I think about that every day whenever I look at this world and think, what are we going to do? And what I remember is what our ancestors have done, what our forebears have done, what they faced, and how dire and dangerous. And we have so many more tools at our disposal because, as I said, they do have to lie, cheat, and steal. They have to pretend. They have to try to make people afraid because we have amassed so much power. And I just remember that. And as Angelica said, and that is what everyone here on the Zoom has said, and what I see you all putting in the chat, is that when we are united, we win. And so that's what I would just remind us. We are united because they are coming for all our communities, but we are uniting to stop them. And we are the majority of this country. And that's why they're coming for us, and that's why we're gonna win.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for those words. Norm, we wrote before the election La Gran Mentira, right? Forecasting what was going to come if Trump were to be elected. Much of that has come to pass. What do we need to be looking out for? What writing on the wall that we're not seeing do we need to be most aware of in this moment?
Well, Juan, we wrote La Gran Verdad about La Gran Mentira. We wrote a report on the big lie targeting migrants, unfairly targeting and blaming migrants. By the way, something that every authoritarian and autocratic regime does. They just pick different targets as part of their attacks on democracy. I think we have to look out for the continuing assault and worsening assault. We're seeing the targeting of nonprofit organizations this week, of charitable entities, of groups that are innocent who had nothing to do with the terrible crime of the killing of Charlie Kirk. And yet they're all being attacked in the same baseless way that migrants are attacked. But the other thing that we have to look forward to is we're seeing the energies of of democracy response. So with my wonderful colleagues from the C3 community who represent the NGOs, who are most of the people on this call, we have been to court hundreds of times and we've won a lot. And the Supreme Court only affects a small slice, about 10% of those cases. We're seeing public protest rising in ways that we've never seen before. And in fact, what happened in Los Angeles led to the massive outpouring in No King's Day. We're seeing political leadership so inert in early January when it felt like the only thing we could do was bring court cases. Political leadership exemplified by the AGs, the other box on our screen. And by the way, my friend AG Ford is exactly right about Illinois v. Wardlaw, which is a very important precedent on why Los Angeles is wrong. So we're seeing that AG leadership spreading to other political leaders. And those are and we're seeing the press and the media wake up to the crisis we face. And we're seeing authoritarianism very, very unpopular with the American people in and at the polls in a nonpartisan way. So when you look at all of those pistons of democracy, we're not only going to see enhanced threats, but I believe we're going to see much more pushback, and that's going to grow and grow. The American people like their democracy. They sympathize with migrants who come here. All of us are migrants who come here to build a better life, to make our economy work. And so I think you're going to see some increasing autocratic energies, but a lot of increasing democracy pushback.
Thank you, Norm. Thank you so much for that. General Ford, we're used to working in normalized state from a policy perspective with the White House, the president, the vice president, both chambers of Congress, and we have absolutely no access to that. Obviously, our members of Congress continue to fight, and Leader Jeffries and Schumer, but I have been so encouraged that the attorney generals, the Democratic attorney generals, have basically stuck together and have been the backbone of our democracy and continue to fight for civil rights. What's next on your agenda? What are you going to continue to do, and how can we support you in the work that you're doing in Nevada, but also really around the country?
Well, thank you for acknowledging first off, and I think it's important for people to know that we are, in fact, as attorneys general, putting up a fight. I think we have sued cumulatively this administration over 50 times at this point. And we will continue to stand up against those who violate the rule of law, whether it's Mr. Trump or any of his agencies in that regard. And so what we've said is the litmus test is pretty simple, right? We may disagree with the policy, to be sure, but the litmus test has less to do with policy and more to do with is what you're doing violating the law? And if it is it negatively affecting our constituencies? If so, we're going to get engaged. And we've demonstrated that time and time again, standing up for the rights of our respective residents. And we're going to keep doing that, Juan. We're not going to slow down. You know, it's not always politically expedient to stand up. That's why people say, that's why the HRC president said that cowardice is contagious. People want to sit down. They want to take a back seat. They are afraid to speak up. And so, both from a cowardice perspective, but also from a politically inexpedient perspective. But we are impervious to the political blowback that we get from these things, because we know that we are at the front line. We are both the front line and the last line of defense when it comes to protecting these rights. We stand shoulder to shoulder with you all in the birthright citizenship case, for example. Norm talked about the strategy that one group had to take, filing a class action. We went back and we argued, just even under the president's Supreme Court laid out, that we still prevailed. And we were able to get the nationwide injunction in that regard, because again, we're going to continue to do all that we can to stand up. You know, I recall I used to fly from Vegas to Columbus, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But every weekend, I'd fly from Vegas to Columbus. This was about 25 years ago, and I remember getting off the plane at the airport in Columbus. And I walked through the airport all the way to the rent-a-car place to get my rental car. And I got stopped by a cop. And he said to me, where's your luggage? I said, I don't have any. He says, you only flew here with a backpack. I said, that's right. And he says, I see you do this every week or so. Like they have been trailing me, seeing that I fly back and forth with just a backpack. And I would like to think that I would like to not have thought that it had something to do with the way I looked. But they said ultimately I fit the profile of a trafficker because I was only flying with the backpack. Now I said to him, what's in my backpack is my draft of my dissertation. I'm working on my PhD. My family lives in Vegas, and I fly back to Columbus every week to work with my PhD advisor. His mouth dropped. The reason why I share this story is because I think we all have stories like this where you are profiled, and it is a very uncomfortable feeling. Again, maybe I did fit the profile of a trafficker, never flying around with suitcases. But again, I had a hard time thinking that that was the only reason why he was stopping me as I walked back and forth. That lit a continued match that I have continued to light every single time we are faced with daunting tasks like this. It reminds me of what people are dealing with on a daily basis, what they are going to be dealing with going forward because of this horrendous decision, and the importance of the work that we do as attorneys general. That's why we won't stop what we're doing. We continue to look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. So I want to thank all of our distinguished guests. Thank you, Jin Lee. Thank you, Angelica, Maya, Norm, Attorney General Ford. Thank you for the time, commitment, and the incredible work that you continue to do to support the Latino community.